All right, so can everybody hear me okay?
We can.
Good, yeah. Okay, I see hands up there somewhere. How you doing, Mary? Mary? Good to see you. Christina's gonna motor in. They got stuck at the end of the drive. That was a fear I had the whole time. Anyway, welcome everyone. I have to make sure I realize the camera I'm looking at is this one and not that one. And so I'm Wayne Bell. I'm loosely affiliated with Washington College as a senior associate, so you'll see that on some of my emails. But this is a collaborative effort between the college and the Chesapeake Forum, and I'm just delighted. We've been doing a course like this now for, oh gosh, the past 10 years or so anyway. It's been a delight. We've covered a lot of different things, seen a lot of different birds. I hate to even think about the whole list that we've seen, but we've probably seen close to 150, 160 birds over the course. So because of the delay, I'm not going to go around the room and talk too much. We'll have a chance to talk at the field on the field trips. So I want to launch into this fairly quickly. But feel free online or in here to interrupt me at any time if there's something that I say that you don't understand, or if you can't hear me, or whatever. Or if you have to leave the room, Evans, I'll put my hand up if I do. And we'll go ahead and head into the course. So what I'm going to do now is figure out a way to get my PowerPoint up.
Well, why don't we do this way? How about I'll share the PowerPoint.
Okay.
And share that with everybody. And then when you're done with the PowerPoint, I'll stop sharing and you can share.
Good.
I think
We're going to go online at the end if time allows. And if time allows, maybe we can go around and talk to each other as well. But I want to get started with this, so at least we can cover the bits. Okay, this is Oh Wow Waterfowl. And here's some of the groups of birds that we hope to see. And in fact, many of these are some of the species we hope to see as well. Those of you who have been through some of the birding courses before or not novices will recognize most of the top row there. That's the mallard, top row on the left. Middle is Chesapeake's signature species, I think, probably one of the more famous ones of this region. That's the canvasback. And over on the right is a hooded merganser. We saw several of them in our Christmas bird count. It's one of the most colorful small ducks that we have. That funny looking thing on the middle left is a surf scoter. And the duckers, ducky people and hunters call it the skunkhead. Obvious reasons. Switching all the way over to the right in the middle is a interesting little duck that sometimes forms huge rafts of thousands in the summer, in the early spring before it migrates away. It's called the ruddy duck. In the middle is a grebe, not a duck at all, more related to loons. That's a winter plumaged horned grebe. Down in the lower left is a ring-billed gull. We're going to see lots of gulls on our trips. In the middle of the bottom is a top view, not my photograph in this case, of a northern gannet, which we hope to see at Ocean City in a couple of weeks. And then one of the few shorebirds we'll probably see on our coastal trip is a sanderling. And I'll say more about that bird when we get to it a little bit later in the talk. So, will this advance them?
Sorry, no, I will do it.
Okay. So here we go. Birds and birding on the Eastern Shore is kind of the whole context in which I've been doing these courses. And Oh Wow Waterbirds with the collaboration that we have. The schedule, some of you picked it up here. I've been circulating it around. But the schedule is, as it's done now, it changed a little bit from just before the course was announced for registration. I had to move the coastal trip to where it is now. The two all-day trips, really long-term trips, are in red, and those are coming up, one on the 27th and one on the 17th of February. They go to distant places, bring your lunch. The first trip is going to be on this coming Monday, and if you have been looking at the long-range weather forecast, even I'm cold reading it. We're going to be on the downslope of a polar vortex coming in The cold won't be so bad. It may not be above freezing, but it's the wind, and we're going to be exposed a bit there at Oakley Street in Cambridge. The good news about that trip is that it's a short trip, and we're not too far from vehicles, and the ducks are very close there. That's the whole point of the thing, is seeing several species of ducks up close and personal, if you will, even photographically, if you wish. And lots of them there. I haven't scouted it this year, but that's always been the case in the past. And so we'll go down there, spend an hour or so, depending on how bad it is, and then maybe check out some gulls along the Cambridge waterfront to introduce those to you. But I have, when I was putting the schedule together the other day, it reminded me of Robert Frost. So with all due to him, the poem Fire and Ice, do you remember that? Fire and ice. Some say the world would end in fire. Some say in ice. What I've tasted of desire, I hold with those who favor fire. But if it had to perish twice, I think I know enough of hate to say that for destruction, ice is also great and would suffice. All righty. So that's coming up. Let's go back to that.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. And then we'll be closer again. We'll go down to Tillman and a couple of locations there to look at a group of ducks we'll call the diving ducks. Then we'll try the dabbling ducks at Pickering Creek Audubon Center. Hopefully their impoundments will have thawed by then. I might have to change that destination if it's all iced in. And then we tie everything together with a nice long trip to Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, where there's a lot of ducks, possible shorebirds, and who knows what else. Any other bird we see that's not a warbird, I will help you with identification, from bald eagles to hummingbirds. There is one hummingbird in Tillman, by the way.
For number 3, it says it's from 8 to 4.
Whoopsie, yeah,
And that should
that's a typo. No, it should be 8 to noon.
Okay.
I went over that. Yeah, I had to cut and paste. That's
On
a
the
story.
page on our website, as well as our calendar, we have corrected them. So-
Okay. Mea culpa on that. Okay, thanks for catching it. If I ever do it again, I'll have to come back to it. Okay,
Which time is different? Which? For which
Number-
number?
number 3, diving ducks. That's a short trip and we'll end it before noon.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, appreciate you picking up that error. Okay, my contact information is at the top of that. And I sent out an email, which I'm going to circulate around the class list, where I only have email addresses. If you got that email this morning, or if you get it later, by all means, just check the box that says email change. If you have a preferred other email address you want to get in communication, be in communication with, please write that in there clearly. But there's no change if you got my email or if you get it later. If you don't get it and haven't checked your email today, and you go home and you don't see a message from me, please email me at the contact information, wbell2@washcollege.edu, and let me know so I can get your proper address. We all make mistakes. The ones that I put in my email list were simply copied and pasted from what you registered, but there may be other preferred addresses. We are going to use email rather extensively to stay in touch. Not so much in the field. I have a cell phone there, and you can get a hold of me with text messages or a phone call if we're rendezvousing and you can't find me or something like that, or if you have just a specific question. But as far as sending out information for the course, the email is the way to do it. I will send out always ahead of a field trip information on where we're going, where we might rendezvous if it's not locally, and so on, other details about the trip. And after the trip, I always send out a trip report, which has a list of the birds that we agree we saw, and also some ID hits relative to what we saw, so that they're not just all textbook stuff. So those two communications are especially important. Okay, let's move along then. Bad news. People who have heard me talk before here and there in the last 3 or 4 years know that I go back to this paper by Rosenberg et al. From the Cornell lab that appeared in the journal Science, I think it was in September of 2019, in which they document, if you hit the space bar, Trina, there you go. They document with, in the whole paper, which is quite extensive, a whole bunch of data sets, including eBird, which I'll talk about in a little while, including the Audubon Christmas bird count, including the North American Breeding Bird Survey, and some radar studies, thank you, that were done at more recently than in the late 2000s. And all of that indicates that we've had a decline in bird populations on the order of 3 billion birds, which is about a third of the 1970 abundance of North American birds. This is songbirds, all kinds. We'll look at some of the classes in just a second. But we've lost a third of our bird population roughly in the last 50 years. Bad news. For this course, there's some good news. The next slide will show. This is from the same paper. There's actually an error under D all the way at the bottom. Under D, all the way at the bottom on the scale there where it says 0 and minus 20 on one side and minus 20 on the right side. The right side would be plus 20. Even a famous paper makes mistakes. The wetland birds, which is a lot of the birds we're going to be talking about, had actually increased relative to the others. And toward the end of the course, we'll talk a little bit about why. But that's the only group that's really increased. Nobody else has stayed the same. In their paper, they organized the data according to what they call biomes, which has to do with biological regions in North America. So the eastern forest biome, which they're using, actually also includes some of our eastern grasslands, like the bobwhite and other species that we know have declined a lot. In 2002, the State of the Birds report, the next slide.
Question.
Yes.
The frame, the little black, what is that range?
Okay, let's go back. All right. Which one?
Like in wetlands, it runs from -5 or +5 to 20 something.
Yes.
The black line with the two.
Oh, that's the confidence error.
Okay.
That's basically a statistical confidence error, meaning
Plus or minus.
could have been, on that black line could have been plus or minus that much, and that's basically the average, is what the bar shows. Good question. In the State of the Birds report, they group the data and some more recent data according to kinds of birds instead of biomes, and that makes a lot more sense to a lot of us here. In that bit, geese have increased over 1,000%.
Really? Wow.
Now, it doesn't mean we're dripping with geese right here. It's the overall population. Geese have actually been arriving here, the migratory ones, at least a lot later in the fall. This year, our Christmas bird count, the goose population was down a bit. But that's because there were more up north because we had a fairly mild fall. It wasn't until lately that we've had this real cold snap. And so there's corn and things on the fields up there and not a lot of snow. And so the geese were able to stay further north. So it doesn't necessarily mean locally we've got this huge increase, but overall the population is doing very well. Geese and swans. Dabbling and diving ducks, which I'll define for you a little bit later, but there's the mallards and scoters and so on, have also increased fairly well. Actually, not scoters, but canvasbacks. Waterbirds in general, such as herons, have increased slightly. Then we start to get into the negatives. Shorebirds down a third, bad news there. And grassland birds, which we will not be discussing in this course, but grassland species in particular, have declined by well over a third. And there's a lot of initiatives afoot here to restore grasslands, what we call early ecologically successional habitats, grasses and scrubs, to get them back. That group of birds has been declining for quite a while.
So besides the bobwhites, what other species do you?
Grasshopper sparrow, field sparrow, meadowlark, one you might be familiar with, eastern meadowlark, and then a lot of grassland species live in the prairies out west.
Oh, okay.
So it also includes some of the pipits and some of the longspurs and others such as well. Tipping point species are 70 species in this particular analysis that have lost over half their population in the past 50 years and are still declining. So they call them being at their tipping point. If they keep declining a little bit more, they might start to really slide toward extinction. I don't know that that's going to happen, but certainly the overall picture isn't very good. But it's good for us in the course because a lot of the birds we're going to be looking for have increased at least slightly. And at the last class session, I'll talk to you a little bit about insights into that conservation. Okay, questions?
Yes, pheasants in there.
Pheasants would be in there, but they're introduced, so they're not probably included in the database.
They wouldn't be part of the tipping point.
Yeah, they would probably not, probably. I have to go back and look at what birds are there. I don't have that list in front of me. But pheasants, interesting enough, in the 2019 report, Rosenberg's report, house sparrows and starlings were included, and they're declining. So, but I don't think pheasants were because they're introduced and then they die out, or introduced and they die out.
What does that mean, introduced?
They've been brought in by hunt clubs, game
Okay.
farms,
So
things like
not
that.
into the-
Generally for hunting purposes.
Yeah.
They're more stable in the Midwest.
So you bring them in and kill them.
Yeah.
Wayne, where are they native?
China.
China.
Interesting.
Can you say bird flu?
Yeah. They're gonna be slapped with tariff pretty soon.
Big one.
Okay, well, I'm glad you're here because this is really important to you. There have been some studies about birds and well-being, and this one appeared a couple of years ago in EcoWatch. Birds are linked to happiness levels. How about that? So we all happy? Well, if you're not, oops, I keep wanting to go. Just hit space bar again.
Sorry.
There's a quote in the paper that says, being around 14 additional bird species provided as much satisfaction as earning an additional $150 a month. I'm hoping we're going to see about 80 species. So you ought to be able to recoup your investment in this course in spades.
Bird seed.
All right. They don't pay me enough. But that apparently is true, and there have been studies to indicate that. Facetious though it may be, being able to be out, it's really part of just being outdoors and paying attention to the world around you really increases your well-being and your feeling of well-being and feeling of belonging. So I think birds are a good example of being able to do that. Next. Okay, let's get down to a little bit of nitty-gritty here about binoculars. I've had some questions about binoculars even prior to the course. So they're your basic tool for birding, and binoculars come in two general kinds. The poroprism type is beginning to disappear for the most part. It appears in old Turner Classic Movies and other places there where the ship's captain is looking for submarines using poroprism binoculars. Most birders today use a binocular that's sometimes called compact, although true compact binoculars are more like this and even smaller. So, but they're compact in that you don't have the wide tubes. And the reason you have the wide tubes has to do with the prisms inside. Next, yeah, there you go. In poroprism, the prisms are arranged in such a way that the tube has to be wider at the business end. In roof prism, the prisms are smaller and can be arranged so that the tube can be basically straight. Most birding type binoculars now, and birders too, prefer the roof prism type. Why prisms at all? If you've ever looked through an astronomical telescope, an astronomy telescope, the images are reversed. If you move the telescope to the right, the image moves to the left. The prisms rectify that.
Does it also have anything to do with how much light it lets in?
It does as well. The quality of the optics have increased quite a bit since I was a kid, back in the Paleozoic. And so that quality has allowed them to transmit a lot more light, plus certain coatings they use, which are correct for changes in color, chromatic aberration, they call it, as different wavelengths of light bend differently and they have to be corrected for. And the prisms help do that, but the main reason we have them is to rectify the image. So that when you move your binoculars that way, the image moves that way. Okay. In terms of choices of binoculars, I'm not here to sell any, but the choices of binoculars depend. Poroprisms are still perfectly fine. If you inherited a pair from someone or friends or whatever, they still work really well. They probably don't have the high-class optics that the newer binoculars have, but that's a matter of age, not a matter of function. In general, birders prefer 8 by 42 or 10 by 42. When you see binoculars, you'll see that right up front. The 8 refers to the magnification, or to use power. So 8 by 42 is 8 power. That increases the size of the object or its appearance nearby to 8 times. The 42 refers to the diameter of the diameter of the objective lens, which is the business end of the binocular. That's this lens here, the big one. Okay, and it's in millimeters. 42 is kind of a compromise. If you get a wider, bigger lens, it increases the weight of the binocular a good deal because all the internal parts have to match it as well. And so they really get rather heavy to carry around your neck or on your back all day. Smaller than that, like these are 32s. Thanks for bringing this in.
Yeah.
I'll tell you, we'll increase your happiness level. These 32s here are 10 millimeters thinner, and they emit less light. So they're not as bright for the power. Okay, so on the whole, most birders, especially beginning birders, will be much happier with 8 by 42. Depending on the brand name and all of that, that's up to you. I'll give you a couple of suggestions for information. 8 by 42 is kind of the standard thing. It'll work in dimmer light during the end of the day. It'll work if you go out on a boat on a pelagic trip, you can hold it pretty well. When you get into 10 power, all motion is increased as well. And if you have coffee nerves or other problems with, I have 10s now, and I sometimes wish I had 8s. They're harder to hold, though it sounds like you can see the bird closer and all that. If it flips from one twig to the next, you may have trouble following it. I've had that happen more often than I like. My eyes are such that I'm able to deal with that. I don't have the shade problem too much. But in any case, it increases all of those little things that affect us as we get older. And so 8 by 42, if you invest in it, will be the best idea. For eyeglass wearers, and I usually bird now with my glasses on, they have adjustments here. Good birding binoculars have adjustments so that because your eyeglass increases the distance between the lens and your pupil, and the binoculars are constructed to give the maximum light into your pupil, so that with the eyeglass wearing, you already have the space in between. So these caps are flush with the lens. All right. Take your glasses off. You can then, this one, sometimes they slide up, sometimes they pull up. The bird binoculars will move these up so that now the same distance between the lens and your eyes. And you can use either way. So be sure that they have that adjustment. If you were to buy binoculars, again, if you get them from friends or from family, be sure that that happens if you're going to wear glasses when you're birding. Field of view, sometimes you'll get those specs especially if you're buying more expensive binoculars, but try to get something that has a field of over 350 feet and 1,000 yards if it says that. That'll depend a little bit on whether you use 8 or 10 power. Close focus is really essential if you're doing songbirds. It won't matter too much with us with waterfowl, but with songbirds, you want to be able to focus less than 20 feet. You'll find that to be useful if you're watching birds at your backyard feeder. If you can't focus in on them, then it's not close focus enough. 10 to 15 feet if you can get away with it. The cost, well, you've got $1,000, but nowadays optical quality is good enough that you can get an adequate pair for around $200 to $300. I'd be a little cautious going less than that unless it's on sale. I bought my daughter a pair of Celestrons a couple Christmases ago, and they were on sale at Amazon for $100, and they're great. Really good optics, probably listed for about $250 originally. And so you really can do all right at the lower end, at the budget end if you want. But remember, you're investing in something that's supposed to give you a lot of enjoyment. If you want to see some rankings, one of the most recent one appeared in Cornell's Living Birds, their magazine. And in the spring of 2023, they have an article on the best affordable full-size 8x42 binoculars. They make 2 recommendations, but also a number of others as well. And they give you the price as it was back then. Their choice was the Celestron at $350, I think it was. And then one that I'm not familiar with brand-wise, that was the Opticon Oregon model, and that one sold for, let's see if I have it here, $250. And that's the price range I'd probably look at if you want to make that kind of investment. And if you can go to places, the nearest one I know of where you can check out birding binoculars easily is at Cape May, New Jersey, with their Cape May, New Jersey Audubon Station at Cape May. And they've got all kinds there. You can check them all out. And that's nice to do if you want to. But again, optical quality is a lot better than it used to be. And Zeiss's and Nikon's and others are all very good. And the low end of their cost is probably going to be adequate. Okay? All right. Using them correctly. This is the biggest mistake, and I still make it too. Right? I see in this case, let's assume it's a songbird or something, and I want to have a quick look at it. The tendency for novices is to put the binoculars up and then search for it. Okay? Don't. Okay? Keep your eye on the prize and bring them up slowly so that your prize is in the field of view. It's a habit that really you need to get into, and it's not the normal response most people have. Most people like to search around, okay? And then they can say, God, I can't find it, where is it, all that sort of thing. With waterfowl, it's a little easier because they're large and most of them are going to be far enough away, you won't have any trouble locating. But if you do buy binoculars for other birding or for backyard birding or whatever else, again, remember, keep your eyes up, don't look down, know where your binoculars are, and get in the habit of keeping your eyes up and looking down. That's really true if you're using 10 pounds, because the field of view is a lot narrower there. Okay? And that's it. I've had a lot of people get really frustrated when they, especially in our spring course where we do songbirds, really frustrated by not being able to use binoculars. And it's that, learning that habit helps an awful lot. Okay, next one. All right, other resources. Bird guides. The standard bird guide, which has been mimicked many, many times since Peterson first, Roger Torrey Peterson first introduced it in the 30s, I think it was, is the field guide to the birds. It's been through iteration after iteration after iteration and slightly changed in format. But Peterson's big bit always was field marks. That is the kinds of things you could see when you observe a bird that stand out. In the case of, we're going to look at the pintail, for example, one of the ducks. That's the bottom illustration there. He's pointing to the marks on the neck, especially that white stripe on the back. He's also got a hen pintail in the back. Has to do with her bill shape and so on. Those are the field marks, and of course the pintail, okay, which in ducks is kind of unique. So those are field marks, and a lot of other books talk about them, sometimes with and without arrows. Some of the books also use photographs that have been photoshopped in some cases. They're the ones I'm a little cautious about. And the reason is, if they're photoshopped, they might be beautiful photographs, but it's not necessarily what you see. They've been doctored up. Peterson drew his own birds, and therefore he could emphasize those traits that were important and still give you a pleasing picture. Photographs really are much more stark, and they're often the guy picks the best one, or the girl, or whoever's authoring it. And with the Photoshop, they bring out the colors too much and so on, and they're not the best, with one exception. That'll be the next one. Richard Crossley, who now lives in California, used to live in Cape May. Crossley came up with a series of books called the ID Guide, and turn right. Yeah, there's a delay here, so I have to be careful. There you go. Crossley ID Guide, And Crossley does use photographs. He must have taken gazillions of them, and he's found a clever way to use even the worst. So in his ID pages, he'll show usually one, sometimes a page is split, he'll show two species, but he'll show the species against a background of habitat where it is often found. And that background itself is a work of art because it takes about 4 different pictures to make it. Your eye, when you see a bird against a background, your eye adjusts automatically to keep the background, if you will, in focus. But that's not true on a plain piece of paper. So he's had to take 4 different pictures and meld them so that they all look in focus all the time. Very interesting, their work. We had one of our junior birders working with him a couple of summers ago. It's quite a feat to be able to do that. But he also shows the bird, yes, he shows the field guide kind of picture in the front, and then he goes and shows other variations in plumage, looks, and distance, including way we often see ducks, which was more or less that background in that picture there. And still, it's a pintail. And I'll talk to you in a moment about identification of that bird and how we can identify even in distance like that. But it's a nice, realistic look at what you might see. What you want to see is right up front. What you might see, or more likely to see, is in the back. Problem with Crossley's books is they're heavy. You're not going to put them in your back pocket unless you've got a heck of a back pocket. And maybe not even in a backpack. But they're great if you're birding around with your car, or you have access to something like that, or a place where you want to just leave it and then go check it out later. All of that works really well, in which case you might want to use one of the other resources. Crossley has a book for eastern birds. He's just published his western birds a year ago. He has one on waterfowl. Hi, you guys. Crossley ID guide, waterfowl. He has one on British birds. He covers much of Europe too, because he is a Brit. And I think he's got one on raptors. That one I haven't seen. Hawks and things. One of the things that I mentioned about eastern birds, many of the field guides have eastern versions and western bird versions. I recommend that you buy, for around here, the eastern version. If you then go out west, get the western version. The reason is that those guides that cover the whole country get confusing. You find lots of western warblers and you begin to think maybe the bird that you saw was something that doesn't occur around here. And it just increases the bulk and confusion as well. I strongly recommend that you get an eastern version and a western version if that's where you're going to be going, as opposed to covering the whole country. Otherwise, those guides are perfectly. All right, going to bird identification. We talked about field marks. So here's canvasback on one side and a pintail on the other. And head color, if you can see it, the canvasback has a much dark rusty head. Pintail has a brown head. If you can get close enough to see that, that's cool. The pattern, the line up the back of the neck on a pintail shows up pretty well. These, by the way, are drakes. Drakes are male ducks. Hens are females. On the drake, it has that white line up the back, which actually, if the head is turned, it shows up really well. Canvasback doesn't have anything like that. Pattern and features, like looking at the back, canvasback is named for old-style canvas, which was bleached white. Pintail doesn't have that bright white back to it. In fact, it has other patterning down to the waterline, including a blob at the base of the tail, which shows up pretty well. Canvasback does not. And the head shape. Canvasback has a Roman nose, and pintail has a more abrupt forehead. And that profile is really helpful when you see canvasbacks versus, say, redheads, which we might see down at Oakley Street coming up. All of that begins to meld into something that was borrowed from aviation during World War II, called the general impression, size, and shape. Birders abbreviate that as the GIST. And that was used to identify planes flying overhead, often at night. And you could still tell them apart by their general impression, the size and shape, whether they were friendly or enemy, and what kind of plane they were. And so birders do the same thing. And things like profile, behavior, and even habitat become part of the gist. So for example, the northern pintail being a dabbling duck tips up to feed, canvasbacks dive. And so right away, you can classify groups of ducks just by that behavior alone. I'll show you in a second. So all of those contribute to the gist, not just the field marks, so that good birders in time, and it takes time, I've been doing this a long time, begin to be able to identify birds just by the general shape, even if you can't see certain colors and so on. Hunters, duck hunters in particular, are really good at that. We've got a few of them on our bird club, and they can identify birds from all kinds of ducks that I cannot make out at all in flight. Pintail has a gist, though, that makes it the greyhound of ducks. It's a nice, thin, long bird, and they're fairly easy to identify even in flight if you can't see anything else than just them.
Point of clarification, a diving duck really dives. He'll really go under. So that's a dabble.
That's, yeah, pintail is a dabbler. That's right. And that's a pintail's butt,
That's the
which you're going to
pintail.
see a lot of.
It's wondering, I see.
Yeah, there'll be butts about it. Okay, I'll show you some more pictures of those in a second. Let's go to the next one. See what happens when the birds start to get distant,
Oh, yeah.
and see what happens if you get to the ends or the beginnings of the day. Next slide. And notice, maybe you don't know, but I switched the two pictures. Okay, so knowing gist and getting that sense of it will help you really identify the bird, but also appreciate it, because now you know where it lives and you know something about how it behaves. And that's more than a field guide necessarily can show you in a picture. Okay, next. So there's a bunch of pintails at Blackwater, taken I think last year. None of them, I don't think, well, one of them has its head away from us. But I can tell they're pintails just by one, they're dabbling ducks, so I know that they're not canvasbacks or some of the other divers. So we know they're dabbling ducks, that limits it down to about 6 species. Then I see that sticky tails up in the air with that black butt and a little patch of white at the base. So pretty much an easy ID for that. And then they get joined by hens. So now you can see the male and you can see the white line up the back and some of the other field marks to confirm your ID. But what are those darn things in the middle? Well, they turn out to be hen pintails, and I'm not good with female ducks. So I usually
I
identify.
think I told you that.
Yes, anybody knows that. That's my wife. I'm not good with them, and I often identify the hens by the company they keep. Because usually around here, the hens are affiliated in some way with drakes, especially in the as spring comes on and they start to get interbreeding. So if hens frustrate you, try to find the nearest drake and see if that'll help. It's a good clue. Okay, next. Alrighty, there are a couple of other resources, and as time allows at the end of today, I will go back to them and look at the websites. But for now, one of the resources is eBird. Almost all of these are affiliated with the Cornell Laboratory of Ornithology, which is probably not only the citizen science site for birders in the country, but also for scientific data. It's the largest, it has eBird is certainly the largest database of natural populations of anything in the world. And it's all done by informal people like you and me. Citizens can contribute to this. They contribute what are called checklists. I'll show you how to make one when we get into the field on Monday and then beyond, because I'll be using that to keep a record of what we see and how we see it, and then come up with my report at the end of the field trip. Send that out. So that's certainly important. The Cornell Lab of Ornithology's website is also great because in the upper right-hand corner, you'll see search there. If you click on that, we can't do it here. But if you click on that, you can then write in a species name. It will take you to a description of that species, several photographs, range maps, sounds. If it's a Tweety bird, you can hear the call, and so on. Very comprehensive. So if you think the bird is whatever it is, you can go and verify that and maybe even check and see if the range works. You don't need a book for that. You can use the Cornell site if you wish. Okay, and then the third one that Cornell comes out with This is one I have mixed emotions about. It's called Merlin. Merlin is an app that you can load on your phone, or in my case, it's on a tablet. And it allows you to identify an unknown bird in 3 ways. One is you can go through a stepwise process. Where did you see the bird? What was its shape? ... And then it finally homes in on probable species. Another is you can hold your phone up and take a picture. You can frame that picture, and Merlin will try to identify what the bird is. And the third is you can hold your phone up and record temporarily whatever sound the bird or birds are making, and it will give you a list. If it can't home in on one of them, it'll give you a list of probables, and you can maybe go from there. Why am I have mixed emotions about it? I like to really look at the bird. I just enjoy seeing how they behave, what they look like, what they're doing, where they're found. And so, in a sense, having Merlin do the IDing for me without the homework isn't as satisfying to me. But it is for some people. I know some folks that sit down with their coffee in the morning, they have a feeder outside their window, and they put Merlin outside, and they say, oh, look, there's this finch and that finch and so on. Merlin isn't 100% accurate.
I was gonna make a comment on that.
Sure.
I have that app on my phone, and I wanted to see if it could tell me what a hen bluebill was.
Uh-huh.
And it told me it was a red-headed woodpecker.
Yes.
Whoops.
And I mean, I took like 3 photos of it.
Which is a rare.
And it kept telling me the same thing.
Yeah.
It was a red-headed woodpecker. And
Yeah.
I was like, ooh, I'm not too sure about the accuracy here.
Yes.
Is that your experience too?
Yes. You have to take, I don't use the sound recording hardly at all. But, and I don't use the photograph because I do my pictures through digiscopes. But there are those who do and do it well. And when I look at the list of probables, usually it's hit one of them. But if you're submitting a rare bird via eBird, your checklist includes a red-headed woodpecker, which is not a common bird around here. It'll ask you to justify it, and it won't confirm that you're right in the absence of other information. Merlin alone is not sufficient to identify a rare bird as far as the scientific community is concerned. At the moment, maybe that'll change.
So I was just on a trip with someone who was demoing binoculars with bird ID on it, that so it connected to the internet.
Mhm.
Supposedly it's going to be able to identify birds.
Yes, and
It
so-
was built into the binocular?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
my
yeah.
God.
Yeah, they're
Great.
Yes.
$5,000 pair of
Yeah, I don't know what they cost,
Yes,
I don't know
it
that they're commercially available, but he's
they
a
do it.
nature person and they gave it to him, so.
So, as I said, I'm not, I won't promote it as enthusiastic, but a lot of people use it and like it.
What about the Google Lens?
Google Lens also, same kind of
It's
thing.
pretty good.
Yeah, same kind of thing.
We're not-
When I go we took a tour of Morocco a couple of years ago, and then we were in Vietnam this spring. And it wasn't a birding trip. My wife doesn't bird that much, but a couple of people we went with are more like it, and they had Merlin with it, and they could at least identify some of the unknown birds. I didn't know what they were, unknown birds in that region, and then get some idea of what was going on. So it can be really useful if you're going into an unusual area, especially if you're on your own and don't have a guide. If I were going to South America, I'd get a guide, right? We mess with Merlin. But as I said, some people use it. It's getting better and better. Particularly with song, when the birds are in song in the spring, it can be real helpful with warblers and others. And I don't hear real high notes anymore. So golden crown kinglets don't exist. And Merlin, we'll listen to them. So if I want to know if kinglets are around, sometimes I'll turn on Merlin. I use, you do not have to be on the internet to use Merlin. You download what are called species packs or bird packs for the region that you're going to, and it has all that information stored. I use a tablet, and you'll see me using my tablet in the field. That's how I enter my birds for records. I used to do it on pencil and paper, but I don't submit them to Cornell, to the eBird website, until I get home. I don't have internet on that tablet. And so I come home, and that gives me a chance to look at the checklist and make sure what I want to do. If I have any questions, I can do that. And then I submit it, and usually it's accepted that way. So I don't have to jump. But That's all everybody's habits, but it is a resource, and if you bird with other people, they may have it if you don't, and so on and so on. Might as well be aware of it. Okay, yes, question.
Or not?
Same, it's really the same kind of thing.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
And no pros or cons, I mean,
No, I used to use it. I first bought an iPad years ago and I had the Audubon app on it. And then in infinite wisdom, Steve Jobs updated the operating system and I could no longer. So I don't do Apple. That was back in the days when it was several $100 a lot. Okay, now we're going to survey the groups of water birds that we hope to see at least representatives of as we go through the course. We'll start with the geese and swans, which shouldn't be too hard given the fact that they've increased by 1,000%. This is a lovely picture taken up at Y Farm a year ago when the class visited, and Ann Haberton, one of the owners there, took this beautiful picture of swans at daybreak lying in front of the room. These are Canada geese. There is no Canadian goose, it's Canada goose. And they occur in Europe as well. Next slide. These will have, sometimes they'll automatically load and sometimes they won't. I'll try to catch her for that. These are other geese and swans. The one in the upper right, you might be able to see, I understand there's a bunch of them on Route 331 as you get to the bridge heading over Tuckahoe Creek toward Denton. And maybe a Ross's goose in there. But you often over here in the wintertime will see flocks of thousands of snow geese. And up around Centerville is a good place to find them. Also in Kent County. And if you drive to our field trip on Oakley Street going into Cambridge on Monday, don't you do this, but if you have somebody in the car with you, look up the Choptank River to the right, which is north at that point. And you may see what looks like a big patch of ice. And those are snow geese, probably 2,000 or 3,000. I don't know if they're still there. Let's go back to that. I don't know whether I talked about the other one. Yeah, those are swans in the lower right. Gist-wise, they're bigger than snow geese, and you can see they're in a company of ducks there, so you can see how big they really are, with a slightly different head profile. You can't see that in the snows. But they will also form groups in fields, but they're much more scattered. They're not as packed as this. So if you see big birds in fields scattered around, maybe 100 or 2, they're probably swans. Okay. Our local swan, by the way, is called it's called the tundra swan. Tundra swan. Ducks. Fairly interesting little guy that I got. This is a northern shoveler. I had it here in part because it's a cute picture, but also because the bill itself is a spatula duck bill in spades. Huge, big end to it because it filters water as it feeds. We'll have a chance to see them doing that, I hope, on our Ocean City trip. Okay, let's move on. Ducks come in different kinds, and I've talked about them a little bit. We have the dabbling ducks. That includes species like the mallard and the pintail and the American widgeon. We won't probably see the pintail, but the mallard and widgeon should show up in Cambridge for us. They've been pretty common down there in the past. They're the dabbling ducks. They tip up. One other habit that they have, which will help you if they're not feeding and you can't see them doing this, is that if you disturb them, they jump up out of the water. They don't run along. They jump up. They slap the water with their wing and jump right straight up. Dabbling ducks have to feed where they can reach the bottom, and sometimes that's very close to shore or in very small creeks or in ponds, and they don't have a lot of room to get into the air. And so they have this quick fly up in the air. So if you see some ducks and they take off right away, don't run along the water, they're dabbling ducks, and that eliminates a whole bunch of others. Here you see the pintails doing their dabbling. The other big group of ducks are called diving ducks, and there's some subgroups of that. On the left is a bufflehead, and we have Mr. Canvasback and a great lesser scaup, SCAUP. And again, we should see a lot of those at Oakley Street, so we'll have a good up and close look at them and talk about how to separate them out from other species. Within the diving ducks, there's some ducks that hunters call sea ducks. These ducks tend to be further offshore, tend to dive deeper, and tend to be able to feed a little bit, stay down a little bit longer as they feed. They all dive, and when they dive, they tend to just leap up in the water and dive down, just like that. Like that. Okay. There's a small subgroup of them that occur around here in the wintertime called the stiff-tails. There are only two species in North America. One occurs in Texas, that's the masked duck. Ours here are the ruddy ducks, and very often when they're resting on the water or even when they're swimming around, they'll have their tail erect like this, stiff in the air. They're the stiff tails. Ruddy duck is a small duck, smaller than a chicken. Mergansers, yes.
When they dive down, what are they looking for?
They're looking for, it depends on the food. In the case of sea ducks and probably ruddies as well, they dive down and pick up stuff off the bottom, which a dabbling duck could not do. It could be vegetation, it could be crustaceans. In the case of the canvasback, they introduced snail cribicula. Canvasbacks are famous because they used to feed on wild celery back 40, 50 years ago in the Chesapeake. And that was a grass, and it really improved their flavor. So they considered the duck to really hunt and eat.
Oh, the duck itself.
Yes, and now they've started on these clams, and they take on a very strong fishy taste, and they're nowhere near as desirable. This is good for the canvasback, for us. In the case of mergansers, though, they don't have the big spatulate bill. It's a much narrower, thinner bill, and if you were really up close or had one, shot one, you would see that the bill is serrated along the edge. They tend to chase fish. So they dive underwater and chase minnows, things like this.
So,
The hood merganser occurs, whoops, go
One
back.
too soon.
That's okay. Hood merganser goes, is found more in smaller tributaries and creeks in the Chesapeake region, which is nice because you can get pretty close to it, but it's spooky. It'll get off the water as fast as you can. Sea ducks run along the water. Their leg, because they swim for a living, their legs are further back on their body. They don't waddle just like a mallard does or a barnyard duck. They are much more ungainly on land. They tend to push themselves along, so they nest very close to water. And they have to run along the water, surface of the water to take off. The smaller ones can be found in smaller ponds because they have enough room to get airborne. But they all along the water in Norway. Okay. Whereas again, dabbling ducks, bingo. What was the question?
a quick question, yeah, so the dabbling ducks, are they getting stuff off the bottom, therefore they're not in water that's as deep than the diving ducks?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There are cases where some dabbling ducks will die. The black duck once in a while will die, but not regularly. Not regularly. So they have to be close enough to the bottom to be able to.
And that might be helpful in species
Right.
identification.
There's a pond we're going to visit at Ocean City that in the spring, several years ago, had a bunch of coots, which I'll show you in a minute. And the coots are diving birds. They're not ducks, but they're diving birds. And they would go down and pick off the decayed vegetation at the bottom. And then the dabbling duck, in this case, widgeons, would come over and steal it from them. That's how they got down that far. Yeah. So again, tipping up, dabbling ducks, take off from the water quickly. That's a dabbler. Run along the water, don't tip, and actually dive, and sometimes stay under for a minute or so. Those are sea ducks, and then there are several classes of those. Loons and grebes look like ducks, but they're not. They used to be in some of the earlier Peterson field guides, put in the very beginning of the book. It's considered to be highly primitive. Their legs are quite far back on their body, and they really are. If they land and get on land, if they're not near water, then they can run along. They have to run along the water to take off. They literally could perish. They can't fly. There was a bunch of ear grebes that during an ice storm several years ago in Colorado, I think it was, that landed in a parking lot thinking it was water, and they perished. They could not get off. Loons are big birds. They're the size of a very large duck and somewhat more elongate, remind you of a submarine in some sense. The common loon, these are all winter plumage birds. The common loon has a very strong spike-like bill. The one you'll see at Ocean City is probably the red-throated loon. That's the one in the upper right. They have a thinner neck They look a little more dainty, they're a tad smaller. They hold their head a little above the horizontal, and the bill underneath the lower mandible is somewhat chiseled, so it makes it look like the bill is upturned. And in some species, that's quite, some birds, that's quite evident. Grebes are half the size of loons for the most part. There are some bigger ones, but the ones we have around here, this is a horned grebe, basically have this black and white plumage, kind of stubby, no visible tail, and a shorter bill. We'll see a couple of different kinds of grebes. One would be rare, and then the other, the pied bill, has a bigger bill, but a very different appearance.
So what's the deal about flying and landing on the parking lot or?
They couldn't take off.
They can't
They
take
couldn't
off
run along
unless
the
it's
parking lot
out
because of
fixed.
the ice.
Oh,
So they could not get up enough momentum to actually take off.
so when they fly from the water, they run
They run
along
along
the surface
the
of the water?
That's
Okay.
correct. Grebes do
Thank
that,
you.
just like a diving duck.
Okay.
Are grebes and ruddy ducks about the same size?
Yeah, pretty much so. Jizz-wise, a grebe has a longer neck. And that will show up if we manage to see them together. Horned grebes in the wintertime, they used to be fairly common. They're harder to find now. If we're lucky, we'll see some at Tillman, maybe at Ocean City, and maybe with some other ducks, so we can actually get a feeling for the differences between them. Relative to loons, they're smaller. They have some very colorful plumages and breeding plumage, which we might see, not in this course, but might start to show up in April. Loons begin to look like the On Golden Pond loons of the movies. Okay, on. Alcids, what the heck are they? Well, they're part of a group of birds called the Alcididae, and the alcids are in a family of all of their own, and the most famous one that you probably have at least heard of is the puffin. Okay, that's an alcid. All right, these are highly pelagic. They breed in huge colonies up north on rocks all the way across the northern Atlantic, from Newfoundland all the way over to Ireland, and in various colonies on various rocks, usually isolated, and thousands and thousands and thousands. One alcid called the dovekey is probably the most abundant single bird species in the world. The one we're likely to see, but we have to look hard for it, is the razorbill. In the winter, its bill isn't quite as broad as it is in the summer. The same is true for a puffin. And the bill is, but it's still stout. It has this nice contrasted black and white plumage. And the view we're going to get is more like the one on the right, which is a digiscope picture of one we saw at Ocean City Inlet a year or two ago. Sometimes we get 2 or 3 there. More often we get none. But we'll see what we can do. These are the northern equivalents of the penguin. Penguins dive and fly underwater using their wings, stubby though they are, and of course they're not able to fly in the air. Alcids can, but they also dive and use their wings to propel them in part underwater. And so when these birds dive, you'll actually see the wings start to open just as they go down. And that's different from a diving duck, which does not use its wings underwater for any major propulsion. It uses its feet.
These can fly.
These can fly. So our penguins can fly.
Okay, so they are penguins, or?
Well, they're not penguins, they're
They're
the
not
equivalent.
penguins.
They're the equivalent. And ecologically, they fit the penguin type niche.
Well, so the penguins are in the southern hemisphere and these are in the northern
They're in the north.
hemisphere?
That's
I
right.
got you, okay.
And they're both very pelagic, meaning that they tend to occur in the open ocean, far from land, except during breeding season. So that's particularly true with our alcids. There are huge numbers of razorbills off Cape Hatteras. Look like flocks of starlings or so many of them down there. But in Ocean City, we generally, unless there's some kind of funny fallout, we tend to just get a few. They eat fish, and they come in close to shore very rarely. If you ever go on a boat trip, what they call, birders call pelagic trips offshore, one sees lots of razorbills, lots of dovekies, maybe a few penguins, a few other alcids as well. They're very, very uncommon close to shore. So it'll be a red letter day if we do get a razorbill. It'll be a neat bird to be able to see, and this is the time of year we're most likely to see more. among other ducks and true ducks. Gulls and terns. Nobody cares a hoot about gulls. I don't know why. They're big, they're chummy, they're obnoxious. They, they're not too much afraid of people. But nobody likes them. I'm not a gull fan necessarily, but basically, I don't know a lot about gulls. One of the frustrating things about them is the bird that you see there, which is a ring-billed gull at Ocean City Inlet in the upper right, well named, has that black mark that goes around the bill at the end. The other mark of that adult bird is the greenish yellow legs. Many other adult gulls have pink legs, so that helps. The back of a gull is called its mantle. That's the back and the tops of the wings. So ring-billed gulls have a gray mantle, but so do herring gulls and a few others as well. Even so, the adults are easy to do, but gulls come in different kinds of ages. There are 2-year gulls, 3-year gulls, and 4-year gulls. And the years refer to how long it takes to get the adult plumage. Ringbill is a 3-year. And so there are immatures that are heavily streaked and very hard to tell apart. And you have to know a lot about their general appearance, their jizz, and a lot of other information to be able to be a real pro in identifying juvenile gulls. I know a couple pretty well. The herring gull juvenile is the darkest, brownest of all the juvenile gulls in the first year. So that one's fairly easy to pick out. But you get into these transition years, it's different. Terns, on the other hand, are slimmer, a bit smaller, less bulky. Many of our terns have the black cap. Sometimes it's crested on the back, and often a two-tone bill, red or orange or yellow with another color, usually dark on the tip. Not always, that's their general gist overall. That's probably a common tern there in the center lower. The one we're likely to see is the Forster's tern, which is our wintering tern, and the immatures and winter birds have a black splotch across, going back from each eye. They're also much more silvery above, especially as the winter wears on and they get into more breeding plumage. So they're lighter above overall. That tern is rare but not uncommon. Oh, let's say uncommon, but it does occur all winter here. We may see it at Ocean City. If not, it's likely we'll see it at Blackwater. We'll probably see this plumage that's shown in the upper left as a juvenile bird, first-year bird, or possibly a winter adult. We have in Maryland the world's largest tern and the world's largest gull. Our largest gull, which we will see at Ocean City, I'm sure, is the great black-backed gull. I don't have a picture of it. We'll find it when we find it. And the largest tern is the Caspian tern. And again, that one migrates through here. We see it in the fall and again in the spring, probably not during the course, but you never know. But they're the world's largest of each of those. I saw a great black-backed gull eat a whole flicker that fell into the surf during spring migration. Okay. Rails are tough because they're very secretive. They like marshes and they tend to hide in the weeds, and they're not very chummy when it comes to coming to people, but they're often quite noisy, and we may hear some if we're lucky. They're laterally compressed, giving the term thin as a rail, so they can move between the weeds more easily. But we do have one rail-like bird that's related to them strongly, and that's the American coot. And this bird actually can swim. It tends to come out, sometimes in Texas and places like that, there are flocks of thousands of them. We tend to see singletons to groups of half dozen or so, particularly at Blackwater. They like to swim around in the vegetation, but they're not hiding in it so much. So they'll come out and be visible. Great field mark for it is a dark bird with a chalky white bill. Once you see your first coot, you'll know pretty much what it is. They have not webbed feet, but lobed feet. So they're propelled with those lobes on the foot. That was taken at Ocean City Pond many years ago. And the bird was standing on ice and lifting its foot, just as I snapped the picture, so I was able to actually see that. They're nice and aquatic. They can dive or they can dab, in a sense. They tend to just pick vegetation as whatever they can find. But they tend to occur fairly near shore in the marshes. It is a kind of rail.
Is laterally compressed mean a shorter body in the back?
Thinner. That way.
Thinner which way?
Thinner sideways.
Rail.
Sideways.
Like a rail.
You don't look very thin.
Not that one. No, coots are plump. Coots are plump. I don't have a real picture.
Okay.
But,
Are you?
and we're not likely to see rails, especially with all the ice. They're going to be in marshes where they can still pick vegetation. So they're not likely to be in there with the ice all over the place.
So both of those pictures are the coot?
They're both coots.
Okay.
But a coot is a rail?
A coot is a kind of rail. Yeah. When we go to Blackwater, we might be lucky and actually be able to see a rail in the marshes. Depends a little bit on the tide and the nature of how high the water is. But we go there in 4 or 5 weeks, so at least there should be no ice. The chances are good, maybe seeing a Virginia rail. They'll sometimes answer their calls, so I'll play a tape. And I've had them in summertime actually come into a call and walk on my feet.
Oh.
This is a very shy bird. When they're on territory, they mean business. So we'll see if we can get some responses down at Blackwater, maybe at least hear some rails, if not see them. But coots, we should see in a couple of places. Again, this icing thing, I'm used to last year where we had a fairly mild winter and just a scattering of snow that froze. This year is going to be different, and I'm going to scout every field trip. But nonetheless, I don't know what we're going to get or how many. We'll just have to see what we do here. All right, pelecaniformes, that's how I can use a big name for you. But they are pelicans, all right, and pelican-related birds. And there's a lot of birds that are in this group that don't look like pelicans. This is a brown pelican, probably taken down at Hooper's Island some time ago. This is a double-crested cormorant, which is also a member of this family.
Oh, really?
And my digiscoping was just lucky. I caught it just as it was defecating, so I caught it at a very obscure time. But we will probably see them in Ocean City. They're abundant off Poplar Island in the summertime. They are fish-eating birds. And the thing that makes Pelecaniformes family is the presence of a gular pouch, which is the pouch below the throat. And in the pelican, it's pretty obvious, right? Very fine birds, the pelican, his beak can hold more than his belly can. Giving his beak enough food for a week, I don't see how the hell it can. Anyway, the gular pouch in a cormorant is actually very small, but can be used to hold small fish when it brings back food for its young. And when the birds are hot, you can watch it flap like this.
Oh my.
So if you see them in the summertime standing on a buoy where they tend to be drying their wings, you might see the gular patch flap.
Is that because there's a fish in it?
No, it's just a way of getting air, cooling off. Another one, which we certainly is the specialty we want to see at Ocean City. I've seen it every trip there this year that I've been down for whatever purpose, is the northern gannet. And that's the bird in the lower right. The northern gannet has a very distinctive jizz as far as its appearance. It looks like a cross pointed at all points. And that's an immature. The adult, I had a picture of the adult on the splash side at the beginning, but the immature is more mottled, and the real young ones are dark brown. Probably by the time we get to Ocean City, they'll be immatures and adults, if there are any there at all. They can sometimes form huge groups. They breed in gigantic colonies up in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and again, up around like the Alsons do, up around the Arctic Ocean, Greenland, and so on. Huge on big rocks. One of the most famous is Bonaventure Island in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. But occasionally, if there are fish around, because they're fish eaters and they dive their food, they dive from heights of 40, 50 feet. They close their wings, dive, and harder to make a splash.
Looks like
Very-
a big bird.
That's right. Very, very characteristic. part of their jizz, is that small splash thing. Not like an osprey, which really splashes in the water and doesn't go down very far. It has to fly back up. These guys go down 20, 30 feet sometimes in pursuit of
How do you think they
fish.
see it? How do you think they see the fish?
They have adaptations in their eyes that enable them to correct for that, and they do very well. And I have seen them, I mean, this would be the highlight of the whole course if this happened, but I think it was early March, just after this course would have ended perhaps. They came into the Ocean City area and they must have been feeding on shad or something, or herring. And it was like a shower. There were thousands of them diving, coming up, going up high, diving down, coming up, going up high in a big circle, and then a few would peel off heading north. And it was just spectacular. And when they're over a school of fish, that does happen, both in the breeding grounds and down in the wintering grounds. They winter, the center of the wintering grounds is probably the Carolinas, off the Carolinas. They're semi-pelagic, but they do come close enough to shore to see. Yes,
Question for you. So, cormorants are about the same size as Canada geese, correct?
a little smaller, small
Is there-
canyon.
Is there a way to tell the difference when they're off in the distance flying?
Yeah, yes, it is. Canada geese, when they're migrating, have the big V's up high. Okay, Canada geese, when they're not migrating, don't tend to form V's. Cormorants often do. But the big thing about that, and it's true for all the pelican-form birds, is that their flight is flat, 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 glide, flat, 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 glide. If you watch pelicans off Ocean City, they'll flap along the water right at the top. Their wings are almost touching the waves. Then they'll glide, and the wings will touch, and they'll glide, and then they'll flap again. Cormorants, the same behavior. Geese will flap and flap, 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 as will gulls.
And make a huge amount of noise.
Yeah, and also good always. My dad, when I was fishing with him when I was a kid, up in Barnegat Bay, when they had some cormorants, he would always say they were geese. They weren't. I didn't know at the time.
Well, I make the same mistake when they're off in the distance, and then it's not until they're close that you can
That's true.
see the
And-
difference. That's what I was wondering. But
and-
You're
yeah.
saying you look for the flap, 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 and then
Watch
glide.
for the flap and glide. That helps a lot. And that's really going to help with gannets, because when we go down to Ocean City Inlet, there aren't going to be many. There'll be a bunch of gulls. And so we've got to kind of piece through those and see if we can see a flap and glide.
Does the cormorant make a noise?
Not much.
No, that might be another clip that.
Yeah, they're silent. Geese, of course, would usually make cackling sounds. The geese that would be easiest to confuse with cormorants are not the Canada geese. They're good-sized birds. But the brant, and there are flocks of brant down in Ocean City, and they're about the same size as cormorants. Cormorants are snakier, thinner, and when they're sitting on the water, you can tell them from loons because they tip their bill up like this.
But aren't they
Whereas loons
also,
are this way.
they're also all black, right?
They're also all black, but at a real distance, so is a loon.
Okay.
Loons are gray and on top and white underneath, but if they're on the water, they look all red.
Right.
But the shape, the way the bill is held will help. These are not things to remember. These are things I'm just saying to kind of introduce you to these birds, because when we see the real bird, I'll point out all the stuff that you really should try to look at for identifications. You don't have to remember all of this now. It's a lot. But some of that will help when we go to Ocean City. We'll look for flapping glides and piece them out of the ducks. Watching the time, long-legged waders, you know what that one is. That's a breeding plumage bird. They're often a lot rattier and not with the long neck feathers and everything. That's a great blue heron, of course. There is a roost of black-crowned night herons at Ocean City, if they're there, and they were there during the MOS convention in November. If they're there, we'll get a look at a bird that's probably not familiar to most of them. These are about half the size of a great blue heron with a much stockier neck. They're night herons, which means they tend to do most of their feeding at night. At dusk, they fly out and they issue a call that hunters know them. They call them quacks. And they'll quack along and then get to wherever they're going to feed at night, and then quack on their way back to their roost during the day. We have both immatures, and this is a mature adult there at that roost. It's the only place I know where we can find them this time of year reasonably close. But there are sometimes two dozen. And as you walk up to them, they'll flush and you'll get a good look at it. Shorebirds, for the most part, are remarkable in that they migrate through this area. A few stay here. The killdeer is a shorebird. But for the most part, they breed in the Arctic tundra, at least in this hemisphere, the Arctic tundra, and they winter in areas, depending on the species, from the Caribbean all the way through northern and coastal South America to as far as Tierra del Fuego. The record flight for a shorebird is a bar-tailed godwit that breeds in Alaska and was tracked to New Zealand without ever landing, 4,000 miles. An amazing bit, and they have all kinds of physiological adaptations to make that incredible long flight. Breeding in the tundra is kind of important. Their young are called precocial, where precocious comes from, okay? And they're precocious in that when they hatch, within a day, they're able to walk away from the nest and fend for themselves.
That's what
The parents do not feed them.
that's what we're looking for.
Parents do not feed them. Songbirds like we have are called altricial, Altricial. That refers to being dependent on the parents for feeding them until they can leave the nest. Precocial birds can leave the nest often in a day or two. If you've had killdeer nesting in your driveway, you may have noted that the young are gone after the eggs hatch pretty quickly. The parents in the killdeer's case do hang around to kind of defend them. But in the case of Arctic birds, Arctic breeders, which are much of our shorebirds, the parents abandon them. And you go down to Ocean City on the beach, and there are the little sandpipers, right? Going along, following the waves back and forth, doing that sort of thing. That's that bird in the upper right. Only it's not white. Okay? That bird that is generally called a sandpiper is a sanderling. They have precocial young, so they breed in June in the tundra, and the adults start heading south as soon as the young can leave the nest, because the young are feeding on the huge productivity of insects like mosquitoes and flies in the Arctic tundra on their own. The little sandpipers you see going back and forth in August and maybe late July along Ocean City or Delaware beaches are sanderlings, still in a breeding plumage, so they're streaky brown. They're not all white like this. And they have already bred and come back. You're watching them. So what we think are summer birds, summer sandpipers, are in fact birds that are migrants coming through and feeding along the beaches. Those are the sandpipers. So in the winter, the sanderling, we get a few around here, sometimes little groups. They'll still do the same behavior of going back and forth with the waves, but they'll be our palest of our shorebirds. The one below it is a dunlin, very different plumage. Look it up sometime in one of your resources and see what it looks like in the summertime. It's called the red-backed sandpiper in older books because of its plumage. In the winter, it looks like it's mousy on back and lightish below. The bill is longer and slightly downturned, and they sometimes form flocks in the bay behind Ocean City, Assawoman Bay, in the hundreds, if not thousands. And this is one flock that can literally all turn at once. So they go through these incredible gyrations when they're in the air. Everything seems to turn at one time, flash. That's called a dunlin, and it is a winter shorebird here. It also does breed up north in the tundra. One of our resident birds that actually does breed in the Ocean City area and doesn't migrate to the tundra is this larger shorebird. It's about twice the size of a sanderling. This is the American oyster catcher. And it's easy to tell apart. It's very noisy at times with a peep, peep, peep call. And it looks very much black and white in the wintertime. And it has a lovely, big, fat, red bill.
It really does. How does it get the oysters?
Basically, that's kind of a name. It feeds on other shellfish that
Okay.
it can crack or pierce. But it was called an oyster catcher as a common kind of thing. This one was taken this year down at Chincoteague. So that's when we probably see at Ocean City Inlet or in the bay right behind here. We might see 4 or 5 of them. They hang around. They're pretty noisy. If you go down to Ocean City in the springtime, you'll probably hear a lot of them calling, and they breed in the back bay. So it's a resident for us. But the other two are migrants, winter, in this case, winter residents, and the other migrant shorebirds, which are many, head to South America and further. Okay, that's the end of that, and we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to just basically not go back to those websites. We might have a chance to do that in our last class. But now you've got some idea of the kinds of birds we're going to see, with a couple of examples of ones that I hope we do see, nothing else. And perhaps when you see them, you'll remember a little bit about what I said today. But the whole rest of the course now until our final meeting is going to be field trips where we'll do the IDs on the fly or in the water for our, oh wow, waterfowl. Okay, so I will see you on Oakley Street. I am aware of the weather, and if it gets really bad, we'll have to do something about it. But the earliest I could repeat that trip is next Saturday, and I have a commitment right now with the youth group, so I don't want to mess that up.
As far as communicating, if you got to get crazy weather, what's the drop dead time for you? In other words, are you going to call it the night before, or do we that morning check again?
Good question, and normally, if I know the weather's going to be questionable, I'll let you know a couple of days in advance when I would let you know. It could be as late as the night before.
We're already up in the morning. so
Yeah,
that would be-
I wouldn't normally call you, I would normally send out an email, but I'd alert you that it would be to check your email early in the morning or something like that. Because, I mean, who knows what this would do? The Ocean City trip looks good. It looks like it's going to be a little above freezing and not windy. But that's 10 days out, who knows? But Monday, I think we're going to see a piece of vortex. And the only good news I can tell you is we're on the downside of it. And so it's going to get worse as the day and week goes on. We should be at the front end. Maybe not as much wind, maybe not as cold as it will be the rest of the week. We'll see. I'll be scouting that place on Friday, tomorrow. So I'll be able to tell you a little bit more about it and tell you where we're gonna meet at the Sailors Park there first. So I'll let you know.
Need a salesman.
Yeah.
But you'll let us
And
know.
then we can carpool from there because we'll come right back here. And that will save us some parking difficulties. Okay? All right. Welcome, guys. Good to see you all.
Yeah.
Okay.